All right, buckle up. We're talking about Texas today. Land of barbecue, cowboys, and apparently some of the most spectacularly depressing places you could ever have the misfortune of calling home. I know Texas has amazing cities, but we're not here to talk about those. So grab your sweet tea, sit back, and let's dive into the absolute worst cities in Texas. Hutchins. There's a place just south of Dallas where 1 out of 3 people live in poverty, where unemployment hits over 8%, while the rest of Texas is cruising at 4%, where the crime rate makes you double-check your door locks just reading about it. Welcome to Hutchins, officially ranked the worst place to live in Texas by Road Snacks out of 342 cities analyzed. 342 options, and Hutchins came in dead last. The poverty rate? Around 35%. That's not a neighborhood, that's systematic failure. Unemployment sits at 8.3% when most of Texas is thriving. And the crime rate? Roughly 60% above the US average. But here's the kicker. You get all the downsides of living near a major metro, the traffic, the car dependence, the congestion, without any of the benefits. No cultural amenities, struggling schools, limited city services. Picture this. You're commuting into Dallas every day because there are no decent jobs locally. You're sitting in DFW traffic. You finally get home to a neighborhood where property crime is rampant and your kid's school is underfunded. That's not a suburb, that's a trap. Balch Springs. If Hutchins is bad, Balch Springs looked at that and said, "Hold my beer." Violent crime here is 225% above the US average. Listen to that again, 225%. You've got a higher chance of being a victim of violent crime in Balch Springs than in 83% of American cities. The infrastructure is crumbling, poverty is widespread, and the school district? Let's just say you're not moving here for the education. Norada Real Estate literally called this the current worst place to live in Texas. Not one of, the worst. Can we talk about what 225% above average violent crime actually means? That's not a bad neighborhood. That's a crisis. That's should I even go to the grocery store after dark levels of danger. And you're still dealing with high unemployment, 8.6%, low median incomes, aging, failing infrastructure, zero transit options, all while being stuck in the Dallas sprawl with some of the worst traffic corridors in America. Be honest, would you raise your kids here? Raymondville. Let me paint you a picture. There's a small town near the border where nearly half the population lives below the poverty line. Half. That's Raymondville. Population roughly 11,000. Median household income so low, it'll make you wince. Norada described it as the poorest city in Texas by a number of metrics. And they're not exaggerating. Poverty rates above 30%. Some estimates push it past 40%. Limited healthcare access. Serious drug trafficking problems. And employment? Good luck. The median home value is around $80,000. Sounds cheap, right? Until you realize there are no jobs, no opportunities, and the infrastructure to support basic quality of life barely exists. When half your population can't afford basic necessities, that's not just economic hardship. That's a community in survival mode. And the systems that should help? Underfunded, overwhelmed, barely there. You're in South Texas heat. You're exposed to tropical storms with minimal resilient infrastructure. And your path out? It's not clear. That's Raymondville, Robstown. Here's a stat that should terrify you. Unemployment in Robstown hits 10.3%. The median income is around $35,000, and nearly 40% of residents live below the poverty line. 2 out of every 5 people. Poor, struggling, barely making it. Road Snacks ranked Robstown the number 2 worst place to live in Texas. And when you look at the numbers, it's not surprising. Let's talk crime. The violent crime rate is roughly 3 times the US average. 3 times. The schools? Under-resourced and posting some of the worst testing results in the state. Economic opportunities? Limited to agriculture and whatever low-wage work you can scrape together. Here's what gets me. You're close to Corpus Christi and the coast, which should be a positive. Beach vibes, tourism, opportunity. But Robstown doesn't benefit from any of that. It's just stuck. Low home prices, around $85,000, don't mean affordability when you can't find work that pays a living wage. Think about that. You're surrounded by coastal beauty and you're too broke and stressed to enjoy any of it. Port Arthur. You live in a city that's been repeatedly hammered by hurricanes. Your infrastructure is crumbling from storm damage and decades of deferred maintenance. You work at a refinery that spews pollution into the air you breathe. and 1 in 3 of your neighbors live in poverty. Welcome to Port Arthur. Unemployment around 8%. Home values stuck at $95,000 because nobody wants to move here. And the Beaumont-Port Arthur Metro ranks near the absolute bottom nationally for education and quality of life. But wait, there's more. The crime rate is elevated. The tax base is shrinking because people are leaving. And you're sitting in Hurricane Alley with aging infrastructure that can barely handle the next big storm. The area has been hit by Harvey, Rita, Ike, major disasters that devastated communities and took years to recover from. And each time, Port Arthur comes back a little weaker, a little poorer, a little more forgotten. You want to talk about petrochemical industry exposure? Heavy refinery presence means jobs for some, but it also means industrial pollution, environmental health risks, and an economy that rises and falls with oil prices. Not exactly the Texas dream. Prairie View. There's a city in Texas where the median household income is $19,100. $19,000 in 2026. Let that sink in. Prairie View holds the crown as the #1 poorest city in Texas, according to Road Snacks. Poverty rates exceed 37%. And outside the university campus, the economic reality is brutal. Now here's the twist. Prairie View A&M University is here. That's a legit educational institution with history, culture, and opportunity. But that university exists in a bubble. The surrounding community, completely different reality. Can we talk about the irony? You've got higher education, student life, research happening on campus, and then you step off campus into one of the poorest communities in the entire state. Limited city services, few job opportunities if you're not connected to the university. Housing quality is rough. Social services are stretched thin. Have you ever heard someone say, "I'm moving to Prairie View for the opportunities"? No, because unless you're attending or working at the university, there's not much there. Roma. Population around 11,000. Median income under 28,000. Poverty above 34%. That's Roma, sitting right on the border in Starr County, one of the poorest counties in America, with poverty rates exceeding 30%. You want to know what limited economic opportunity looks like? Roma is the case study. The local job base is minimal. City services are basic at best. Cultural amenities? Forget it. And the infrastructure? Aging, car dependent, and stretched thin across a population that can't afford much. Here's the thing. Border cities often get painted with a broad brush in political rhetoric. But the reality is more complicated and way more depressing. Roma's problems aren't about immigration or border policy. They're about systematic poverty, lack of investment, and economic isolation. Imagine trying to build a life where 1 in 3 people around you are in poverty, where job options are scarce, where the nearest real city is an hour away and you're burning gas you can barely afford. That's not living, that's surviving. And if you think, well, at least housing is cheap, sure, until you realize cheap housing without income is just a different kind of broke. San Benito. Let's talk numbers. Poverty, 30% of households. Crime, more than double state averages. Schools, under-resourced and struggling. Opportunity, limited. That's San Benito in a nutshell, part of the Rio Grande Valley's cluster of distressed cities. NORADA's data shows crime rates significantly higher than Texas and national norms. We're talking property crime, violent crime, across the board elevated risk. And when you combine that with high poverty and weak schools, you've got a recipe for generational struggle. The RGV as a whole deals with some of the lowest educational attainment in the country. San Benito fits that pattern perfectly. Limited social services, weak infrastructure, and a population that's largely stuck. Think about what it means to raise kids in a place where the schools are underfunded, crime is high, and economic mobility is basically a myth. You're not setting them up to thrive. You're hoping they can claw their way out. And here's the gut punch. This isn't some tiny town in the middle of nowhere. San Benito has over 24,000 people. That's a real community, and it's failing on almost every metric that matters. Livingston. Unemployment, 6.5%. Poverty, over 21%. Crime rate, 150% above the national average. Violent crime and property crime are both roughly 90% above US norms. Median income hovers around $33,000. Home values are stuck at $89,000 because demand is non-existent. But wait, there's Lake Livingston. Beautiful reservoir, recreation opportunities, nature. Cool. Doesn't matter when you can't afford to enjoy it because you're working 2 jobs to stay above water in a town with limited employment options. Here's what frustrates me. Livingston is a small town that should benefit from its natural amenities, lake access, East Texas setting, but instead it's mired in poverty and crime. The city services are limited. Social services can't keep up with need. And because it's car dependent with poor street connectivity, if your car breaks down, you're basically stranded. No transit, no backup, no safety net. Just you and your broken down Civic trying to figure out how to get to work. Freeport. Welcome to the Gulf Coast, where hurricanes are a lifestyle and your city services are described as weak, even before the next storm hits. Freeport has a poverty rate around 21%, unemployment near 9.7%, median home value at $80,000, and a crime rate that gives you a 1 in 37 chance of being a victim. Let me ask you something. Would you want to live somewhere that's simultaneously poor, crime-ridden, and in the direct path of Gulf hurricanes? Because that's Freeport. Coastal location means you're vulnerable to flooding, storm surge, and category whatever decides to roll through. And your infrastructure is already aging and underfunded before the hurricane. The petrochemical industry is heavy here. Refineries, port operations, which means jobs for some, but also industrial exposure and environmental health risks for everyone. Imagine this. Storm warnings go out. You're trying to decide whether to evacuate. Your home is worth $80,000, so you don't have much equity to rebuild if things go sideways. Your job at the plant might not be there when you get back. And FEMA aid? Good luck navigating that bureaucracy. That's not resilience. That's vulnerability on a structural level. Killeen. Here's a fun fact. Killeen has one of the highest violent crime rates in the nation. Gang violence, drug trafficking, a murder rate that competes with cities triple its size, and a 1 in 43 chance of being a crime victim annually. Neighborhood Scout says Killeen is safer than only 17% of Texas cities. 17%. But sure, let's also talk about how 15.7% of residents live in poverty, above the US average, and how the public school performance is described as bleak. Killeen is a military town, built around Fort Cavazos, formerly Fort Hood, which means the economy is heavily dependent on the base. If you're not military or working base-adjacent jobs, your options thin out fast. And the urban planning? Classic car-centric military town. Sprawling, strip malls, limited transit, no walkable core. Okay, rant time. Military towns should be better than this. You've got a steady population, federal money flowing in, a built-in community. And yet Killeen still manages to have massive crime problems and struggling schools. How? How does that happen? Comment below if you've lived in Killeen. Tell me I'm wrong, because the data is not kind. Snyder. Let me introduce you to Snyder, a West Texas town where unemployment is triple the national average, where city services, public transportation, recreation, basic infrastructure are described as extremely limited, and where violent crime is rising. It's been called one of the poorest places in the state, and they're not exaggerating. The economy is over-reliant on volatile energy sectors. Oil and gas boom? Great. Bust? Everyone suffers. There's no diversification, no safety net, just boom or bust cycles that leave families scrambling. Let's paint a picture. You're in semi-arid West Texas. Hot summers, dust, wind, limited environmental amenities. The nearest real city is hours away, and local job options are tied to an industry that could collapse tomorrow. Transit? Non-existent. Recreation facilities? Minimal. Social services? Stretched beyond capacity. You're essentially isolated in a place with few resources and fewer opportunities. And if you're thinking, well, at least it's affordable. Sure, housing is cheap, but cheap doesn't matter when there are no jobs. That's not affordability. That's just being broke in a place nobody else wants to live. Would you move to Snyder? Be honest. Brownsville. Okay, this one's complicated. Because Brownsville isn't uniformly terrible, but it ranks near the absolute bottom nationally on several critical metrics. Lawn Starter's quality of life ranking put Brownsville among the worst-rated U.S. cities out of 500 analyzed. The Brownsville-Harlingen Metro ranks dead last, or near it, in education among U.S. metros. Dead last. RoadSnack's data shows low median income, around $47,000, and significant poverty despite modest unemployment. But here's the twist. Brownsville also has an extremely low cost of living. Housing is cheap. Border trade brings economic activity. There's cultural vibrancy and cross-border connections. So what gives? How can a city be simultaneously near the bottom nationally and also ranked 87th out of 150 in US News's best places to live? The answer? It depends what you measure. If you prioritize cheap housing and cultural authenticity, Brownsville has appeal. If you care about education, infrastructure, and upward mobility, it's a disaster. Think about that. A whole city existing in this weird space where it's both kind of livable and fundamentally broken depending on your priorities. That's Brownsville. Structurally poor, but not uniformly miserable. Still wouldn't call it a top destination though. The Rio Grande Valley, McAllen, Pharr, Mission. There's a metro area in Texas with the highest poverty rate of any metro in America. 27.2% of residents below the poverty line. That's McAllen, Edinburgh, Mission. The Rio Grande Valley. Let that stat breathe for a second. Highest poverty rate in the country. Not one of, the highest. Unemployment persistently hovers in the mid 6% range, while Texas averages around 4%. Multiple RGV cities, Pharr, McAllen, Mission, rank near the very bottom of U.S. quality of life scores. Educational attainment? Also near the bottom nationally. Here's what kills me. The RGV isn't some isolated rural area. We're talking about metro areas with hundreds of thousands of people. Real cities, real communities. And they're structurally failing. Can we talk about urban planning? Extremely car-dependent suburban sprawl. Limited high-quality transit. In a region that's brutally hot, humid, and flood-prone with minimal green infrastructure investment. You're essentially forced to drive everywhere in 100-degree heat. And if you can't afford a reliable car, you're stuck. The culture is there. Border identity, local traditions, cross-border activity. But higher-end cultural institutions, museums, theaters, far fewer than larger Texas metros. It's a poverty trap with sunshine. Beaumont and Port Arthur, Metro. If you thought one distressed Gulf Coast city was bad, meet the Beaumont-Port Arthur Metro, where two cities combine their problems into one miserable package. Beaumont is one of the worst quality of life cities in Texas, and bottom 20 nationally. The Metro ranks among the least educated in America. High poverty, repeated hurricane damage, petrochemical industrial risk, aging housing stock. It's like someone made a checklist of ways a place can be terrible, and Beaumont-Port Arthur checked every box. Wallet Hub confirms, this metro is in the bottom tier nationally for educational attainment. We're talking bachelor's degrees, advanced degrees, across the board low. And the storms? Harvey, Rita, Ike. Each one devastates the area. Each recovery takes years. Each time the communities come back weaker. Picture this. You're living in aging housing that barely survived the last hurricane. You work at a refinery that's essential for the economy, but terrible for your lungs. Your kids go to underfunded schools, and you're constantly wondering when the next Cat 4 is going to wipe out everything you've built. That's not a place to thrive. That's a place to escape. And if you can't escape, you're stuck riding out every storm, literal and metaphorical. Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi should be amazing. Coastal city, beach access, warm weather, tourism potential. And yet it consistently ranks near the bottom in quality of life and education among Texas cities. Corpus is in the bottom tier of U.S. metros for educational attainment, and it appears on multiple most dangerous cities in Texas lists with elevated violent and property crime. Let me ask you something. How do you screw up a beach city? You've got natural advantages most cities would kill for. Ocean, tourism, fishing, port economy. And somehow, Corpus still manages to combine high crime, poor education, and limited upward mobility. The coastal location brings hurricane and flood risks, so there's that. Plus, industrial and refinery pollution concerns because, of course, we can't just have nice things. Here's what frustrates me. Corpus could be a Texas gem. Instead, it's a cautionary tale about how natural assets don't guarantee success. You want culture? Limited compared to Houston, Austin, or even San Antonio. You want good schools? Good luck. You want safety? Better than some border cities, but that's a low bar. Corpus Christi is proof that location isn't everything. Laredo. Laredo ranks among the worst quality of life cities in Texas and nationally. It's near the bottom for education, elevated poverty rates, unemployment above state averages. But here's the interesting part. Despite all the political rhetoric about border cities and crime, Laredo's violent crime rate is actually lower than many non-border U.S. cities. So the worst status isn't really about safety. It's about poverty, education, limited services, economic isolation. The city and Webb County have high poverty. The metro has limited job diversity, and the infrastructure to support quality of life, underdeveloped. Think about this. You're in a city of over 250,000 people, and you're still dealing with poor educational outcomes, limited cultural institutions, car-dependent sprawl, weak transit, all while being geographically isolated from other major Texas metros. Okay, rant time. Border cities get unfairly painted as dangerous hellscapes by politicians who've never been there. The reality? They're usually poor and under-resourced, not violent war zones. Laredo's problems aren't gangs and cartels. They're systematic underinvestment and lack of economic opportunity. But that doesn't make for good campaign ads, does it? Baytown. There's a cluster of industrial cities east of Houston where the quality of life is so bad they rank in the bottom 10 nationally. Baytown is among the absolute worst. Elevated poverty, lower incomes, air quality issues from petrochemical exposure, aging infrastructure, car dependence. You're living in the shadow of refineries and chemical plants. You're breathing air that's been filtered through industrial processes, and your city's economy is tied to industries that boom and bust with oil prices. Crime isn't as extreme as in places like Balch Springs, but it's still above average. Schools struggle, and the urban environment is classic suburban sprawl. Strip malls, parking lots, drive-thrus, repeat. Let me paint you a picture. You wake up, you smell the refinery before you see it. You drive to work on congested roads. You pass aging strip centers and deteriorating housing. You get home and worry about whether the plant emissions are affecting your kids' health. That's Baytown. And remember, you're technically in the Houston metro. You should have access to big city amenities, jobs, culture. Instead, you're stuck in an industrial suburb that gets the pollution without the prosperity. Comment if you grew up in Baytown. Tell me what I got wrong. I'm genuinely curious. Pasadena. If Baytown is bad, Pasadena looked at that situation and said, I can do worse. LawnStarter ranked Pasadena among the worst quality of life cities, not just in Texas, but in the entire nation. Bottom 10 out of 500. Think about that. There are 499 cities that are better places to live than Pasadena. Heavy industrial presence, petrochemical exposure, moderate crime combined with structural socioeconomic burdens, aging infrastructure, zero walkability. You're another Houston area industrial suburb where the chemical plants employ some people and poison everyone else slowly. The poverty isn't as extreme as in the valley or border towns, but the combination of environmental risk, car dependence, and limited amenities creates a quality of life that's just bleak. Can we talk about the irony? You're 20 minutes from downtown Houston. You're connected to one of America's biggest job markets. You should be thriving from proximity alone. Instead, you're in a place that national studies identify as one of the worst cities in America. How does that happen? Industrial zoning, car-centric planning, environmental degradation, and decades of treating working-class suburbs as sacrifice zones for petrochemical profits. That's how. Mesquite. Mesquite is an inner-ring Dallas suburb with moderate unemployment and above-average crime per capita. But the real issue is the urban form and environment. Aging retail strips, limited quality transit despite being in Metro Dallas, growing traffic congestion from DFW sprawl, and a general sense of decline as the suburb ages and wealthier residents move further out. Picture this. You bought a house in Mesquite in the 80s, thinking you were getting affordable suburban living. Fast forward 40 years. The retail's dying, crime's up. Your commute's gotten worse as Dallas sprawl pushes outward, and the city hasn't invested enough to maintain quality of life. You're stuck in an aging suburb that's past its prime and sliding downward. Be honest, when's the last time someone said, I'm moving to Mesquite because it's a great place to live? Probably never. Because people move to Mesquite because they can't afford Dallas proper or the nicer suburbs. It's the compromise nobody really wanted, and it shows. Odessa. All right, let's talk Odessa, Midland's less successful sibling. The city itself has a median income around $71,000 to $73,000, but metro-wide poverty hits 20.8%, one of the highest poverty rates among U.S. metros. Crime is moderate. Total crime rate about 2% above U.S. average. But Neighborhood Scout's analysis shows Odessa's crime rate is higher than 85% of Texas cities, with a 1 in 46 chance of victimization. And the economy? Oil dependent. Boom or bust. No diversification. Housing prices swing wildly with the oil cycle. Currently median around $300,000, with rents around $2,200 per month, which is ridiculous for a place with this poverty rate. Here's what kills me. Odessa has many of the same oil boom advantages as Midland. Jobs, money flowing in, federal investment. and yet it still manages to have significantly worse outcomes. Higher poverty, worse schools, more crime, less civic investment. Can we talk about the urban form? Fully car-oriented, no meaningful transit, aging infrastructure, and when oil prices crash, the whole city suffers because there's no backup plan. You're stuck in a place where your economic future depends on global oil markets you have zero control over. That's not stability. That's rolling the dice every year and hoping you don't go bust. Wichita Falls. There's a Texas city with one of the highest murder rates in the country for its size, where total crime is 44% higher than the national average, where property crime is 47% above national norms. That's Wichita Falls, and it's probably the most concerning of all the mid-sized cities on this list. Area Vibes puts the total crime rate at 2,969 per 100,000. Neighborhood Scout says only 8% of Texas communities have higher crime. Your chance of being a victim? 1 in 33. And this isn't some tiny town where one incident skews the stats. Wichita Falls has over 100,000 people. This is a sustained, structural crime problem. Combine that with 17% poverty, well above the US average, and limited job diversity, and you've got a city in crisis. Let me ask you something. Would you raise kids somewhere with a 1 in 33 chance they'll be a crime victim annually? The cost of living is low, housing is cheap, but what does that matter if you're not safe? Wichita Falls has Midwestern State University and regional medical facilities, so it's not completely without resources. But the crime and poverty overwhelm those positives. This is what structural distress looks like in a regional hub. Borger. Let's end with Borger, a small panhandle refinery town that perfectly captures everything wrong with oil-dependent Texas communities. Population around 12,000. Crime rate 10% above national average. Violent crime significantly higher than state and US averages. Burglary more than 2.5 times the national rate. The cost of living is 16% below US average. Median home value around $105,000. Sounds great, right? Until you realize the town was literally founded as an oil boom town in the 1920s and was so lawless it became notorious for crime and organized violence. And modern Borger still carries that legacy. You're in the panhandle, limited amenities, basic services, car dependent with no alternatives. And if the refinery cuts jobs or shuts down, the entire town's economy collapses. Picture this. You're surrounded by flat, wind-swept panhandle landscape. The nearest real city is hours away. Your job prospects are tied to one industry. Crime is high for a town this size. And culturally, there's not much happening. That's Borger. Cheap, isolated, and rough around the edges. Would you move there? Would you stay there if you had options? Probably not, which is why places like Borger stay stuck in this cycle. People with means leave, people without means stay, and the town slowly declines. So there you have it, 23 Texas cities that are objectively struggling by almost every metric that matters. Now look, I'm not here to trash Texas as a whole. There are amazing cities in this state. Places with opportunity, culture, quality of life. These just aren't them. So maybe avoid these particular zip codes. Subscribe for more deep dives into places you definitely don't want to live. And remember, research your destination before you pack the U-Haul.